Thunderclouds rolled over the barren expanse of the testing grounds, a low rumble of thunder echoing across the dirt and stone as a single boxy silhouette appeared on the horizon, slowly approaching with an almost casual confidence that belied the intensity of the terrain it was crossing, its small frame defying the chaos of mud, rocks, and uneven ground. The American Jeep moving steadily, effortlessly, as though it were alive, as though every component of its finely tuned engineering knew exactly what lay ahead. And the Wehrmacht engineers who lined the perimeter could scarcely believe their eyes, their notebooks trembling slightly in their hands as they tried to record every detail, every angle, every mechanical nuance of this machine that seemed to challenge everything they had ever learned about vehicles, mobility and endurance, their breaths caught somewhere between skepticism and awe, their ears straining to catch the low hum of the engine, a sound that resonated like the heartbeat of a creation that refused to be diminished by circumstance. As the Jeep approached a mound of mud-slicked earth, effortlessly climbing over it, tires gripping the slippery slope with a precision that no German design had ever achieved, leaving ruts in the earth that seemed to mock previous prototypes, and as it reached the crest, the engineers leaned in, their eyes widening, their pens scratching furiously on paper as they documented the flawless execution of a vehicle that combined raw power with an almost imperceptible elegance, the suspension flexing in perfect harmony with every uneven surface, the engine maintaining a low, steady growl, seemingly calculating every movement before it happened, every gear shift, every wheel rotation, perfectly timed and executed. And as the Jeep descended into a narrow trench, navigating a maze of jagged rocks and standing water, the engineers murmured to themselves, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and professional envy, noting how the lightweight yet resilient frame absorbed shocks that would have shattered any other vehicle, how the tires, perfectly balanced, maintained contact with the earth without slip or hesitation, how the drivetrain distributed power evenly, maximizing efficiency and performance in conditions they had always considered unmanageable. And as the vehicle emerged from the trench, mud-splattered but unscathed, they saw something they had never encountered before, the embodiment of reliability, simplicity and precision working together in perfect harmony, each part contributing to a machine greater than the sum of its components, a vehicle that demanded admiration even from the most skeptical engineers, who had prided themselves on their decades of experience in mechanical innovation. And as the Jeep continued its relentless march across the testing grounds, navigating steep embankments, waterlogged ditches, and rocky inclines with an unyielding grace, the engineers realized that this was not simply a car, it was a revolution in motion, a blueprint of mechanical genius that redefined the possibilities of automotive engineering in the theater of war. And as they watched, their notes becoming frantic sketches, diagrams and exclamations of astonishment, they began to understand that they were witnessing more than performance. They were witnessing endurance, ingenuity, and adaptability fused into a single, cohesive creation, and the more they scrutinized it, the more they were humbled by its genius, for the American designers had achieved something that German engineers had long strived for, but never perfected: a balance of power, simplicity, and reliability that allowed a vehicle to conquer nearly any obstacle without faltering. Every component serving a purpose, every design choice contributing to its flawless execution. And yet, despite the apparent perfection, there was an almost imperceptible artistry in the way it moved, a rhythm and cadence to the engine, the tires, the suspension, that suggested not just engineering but intuition, a machine that seemed to understand the very nature of the terrain it traversed, responding to challenges before they fully materialized, a harmony of design and function that left observers silent, overwhelmed, and profoundly aware that the world of mechanized warfare had been irrevocably changed by this unassuming American creation. And as the day wore on and the Jeep conquered every obstacle in its path without hesitation, the engineers could feel a mixture of fear, admiration, and inspiration building within them, the realization dawning that they had been presented not just with a machine, but with a paradigm, a vehicle that would haunt their designs and their expectations for years to come, a masterpiece of endurance, innovation, and strategic brilliance. And as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the mud-streaked testing grounds, the Jeep paused for a moment atop a small rise, engine idling low and steady, mud dripping from its tires, its angular silhouette outlined in the fiery glow of dusk, commanding attention, demanding respect, and leaving every engineer in silent, awed contemplation, knowing that they had witnessed the embodiment of mechanical genius, a creation that would set the standard for generations of vehicles to come. And even as night fell, they could hear the echo of its engine in their minds, a reminder of the perfection, the ingenuity, and the relentless superiority of the American Jeep, a machine that would forever redefine their understanding of what it meant to engineer, to endure, and to dominate. The Jeep, now slick with mud and streaked with the detritus of its relentless journey across the testing grounds, moved with an almost deliberate grace, each rotation of the tires a testament to the precision of its engineering. As the engineers, still reeling from what they had already witnessed, leaned closer, scrutinizing every component, every hinge, every rivet, their eyes tracing the path of a vehicle that seemed to defy conventional mechanics, its frame absorbing impacts that would have crippled lesser vehicles, its suspension articulating with near-sentient understanding of uneven ground. And as the driver navigated a treacherous slope, where rocks jutted sharply from the earth and loose soil threatened to send lesser vehicles sliding into chaos, the Jeep responded without hesitation, tires biting into the terrain with a grip that seemed impossible given its small, lightweight frame, the engine maintaining a steady hum, neither overworked nor strained, a quiet song of endurance and reliability that resonated with all who witnessed it. And as it crested the incline, the engineers exchanged glances, a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration flickering across their faces, realizing that they were seeing the embodiment of ingenuity distilled into a single vehicle, a creation where every element, from chassis geometry to tire tread design, from drivetrain efficiency to engine torque output, worked in perfect harmony, a machine whose intelligence was evident not in electronics or computers, but in the genius of its simple, robust design. And as the Jeep approached a deep water crossing, engineers held their breath, expecting at least some falter, some hesitation. Yet it splashed through with ease, the water flowing over its fenders and chassis without slowing, the engine humming steadily, the suspension flexing precisely to maintain balance, and the tires gripping the slippery riverbed as if they were extensions of the terrain itself, leaving onlookers stunned by a display of off-road capability they had previously thought impossible. The muddy tracks behind the Jeep telling a story of resilience and control, a narrative that words could barely capture, as each passing moment reinforced the realization that what they had dismissed as a simple, utilitarian vehicle was in fact an unparalleled masterpiece of mechanical engineering, designed not for appearance or spectacle but for performance, endurance, and the harshest realities of warfare. And as the Jeep continued its journey across the varied terrain, climbing embankments, sliding across narrow paths, navigating fallen logs, and pushing through mud-choked gullies, the engineers' notes became frantic sketches, diagrams sprawling across pages, arrows, and annotations attempting to capture the flow, the rhythm, the intuitive response of a machine that seemed to anticipate obstacles before they appeared, each trial deepening their awe and shaking the foundations of their professional confidence. For they understood with a mixture of fear and admiration that this was a vehicle whose mastery was not accidental, not the result of luck, but the deliberate product of decades of thoughtful design, practical ingenuity, and battlefield-informed reasoning. And as the afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the compound, the Jeep paused atop a small rise, the engine idling low, the tires caked with mud, the body glistening in streaks of sunlight and grime, commanding attention not through size or ornamentation, but through sheer presence, as if the vehicle itself were a teacher, silently demonstrating principles of endurance, reliability, and ingenuity that textbooks and lectures could never convey. And the engineers, momentarily silent, allowed themselves to absorb the gravity of what they had witnessed, understanding that their work, their designs, their notions of vehicle superiority had been challenged in ways they could barely articulate, that this unassuming American creation had set a benchmark that would resonate through their careers, their discussions, and their future designs, a standard so high, so fundamentally sound, that it would remain a source of inspiration, frustration, and admiration for decades. And as the Jeep descended into the final stretch of the day's trials, navigating treacherous rocks, uneven mud, and precarious slopes with unflinching resolve, it became clear to every observer that they were in the presence of something legendary, a creation that combined practicality with brilliance, power with simplicity, endurance with elegance, and as night began to fall, casting a deep orange glow across the compound and turning the Jeep's angular silhouette into a shadow of silent authority, the engineers gathered their notes, exchanged quiet murmurs of reverence, and recognized without reservation that the American Jeep was not merely a vehicle, it was a revelation, a masterpiece whose lessons in design, reliability, and mechanical intuition would resonate far beyond these testing grounds, a creation that had not only passed every trial, but had transcended expectation, leaving a permanent mark on all who had the privilege of witnessing its performance. And even as the darkness deepened, the faint hum of its engine lingered in memory, a reminder that some machines are born to endure, to dominate and to teach, and that this unassuming Jeep, through its simple brilliance, had done all three, claiming a place in history as one of the most extraordinary vehicles ever conceived, a triumph of engineering foresight, battlefield practicality, and timeless ingenuity. A vehicle that would forever challenge assumptions, inspire innovation, and remain unmatched in its quiet, relentless mastery over terrain, circumstance, and expectation, leaving every observer with the profound and unshakable understanding that they had witnessed a true masterpiece in motion, a machine whose genius was as much about vision and anticipation as it was about steel, rubber, and mechanical precision. And as they departed the testing grounds that night, the echo of its performance lingered in their minds, an indelible testament to the American Jeep's enduring legacy and unparalleled brilliance. As the night deepened, a chill crept across the compound, the wind stirring dust and loose leaves, rustling notebooks, and carrying the faint hum of the Jeep's engine, still idling low after its relentless day of trials, a machine that seemed impervious to exhaustion, its metal frame glistening with mud, rain, and the sweat of human labor. And the engineers, still standing around it, notebooks clutched tightly, faces etched with awe and incredulity, could not help but observe with a mixture of envy and reverence as every detail of its construction revealed subtle genius. Every lever, bolt, and hinge designed not only for function but for endurance, adaptability, and simplicity. And as they recalled the series of obstacles the vehicle had overcome that day, deep trenches filled with water, rocks jagged enough to tear apart lesser tires, steep embankments with loose soil threatening to slide underfoot, mud that clung like a second skin, and uneven terrain that had caused German prototypes to stall, buckle, or break, they realized that the Jeep had done so effortlessly, with a grace that was almost humiliating in its precision. And as the engineers began to discuss what they had witnessed, their words trailed off, replaced by quiet, reverent silence. A recognition that they were standing before a machine that redefined every principle of mobility they had ever learned. A vehicle whose performance was not accidental, not the result of chance, but the deliberate manifestation of ingenuity, foresight, and an intimate understanding of the harsh realities of war. And as the Jeep slowly moved forward, tires gripping the uneven ground, engine humming steadily, suspension flexing flawlessly with every minor variation in terrain, it became evident that every element of its design, from the articulation of the wheels to the balance of the chassis, from the torque distribution of the drivetrain to the placement of the engine and weight, had been optimized to function as a cohesive whole, a single entity capable of conquering challenges that had humbled generations of German engineering. And as they observed the vehicle navigate a series of makeshift ramps, loose gravel patches, and mud-choked gullies, they realized that what they were seeing was not merely technical brilliance, but mechanical intuition, a creation that seemed to anticipate each obstacle, adjusting in real time as if the Jeep possessed a mind of its own. And as the engineers scribbled frantic notes, drew diagrams, and whispered theories in disbelief, the vehicle continued to defy expectation, climbing embankments that had stopped tanks, sliding effortlessly across muddy stretches that had ensnared multiple prototypes, and fording streams without a hint of hesitation, its tires biting into the riverbed with uncanny precision, suspension maintaining balance, engine never stuttering, the hum of its mechanics like a symphony orchestrated to perfection. And as the hours passed, the engineers realized that the Jeep's genius was not only in endurance or power, but in adaptability, a capacity to perform flawlessly in a dizzying variety of conditions, the culmination of decades of mechanical understanding distilled into a single, elegant, and deceptively simple frame. And as the first stars began to appear in the night sky, reflecting in the mud-streaked body of the Jeep, the engineers gathered closer, a collective tension in the air, a mixture of pride, envy, awe, and the dawning realization that this machine represented a standard they could scarcely hope to meet, the quiet brilliance of its design challenging every assumption they had ever made about vehicle engineering, battlefield mobility, and the limits of durability. And as the Jeep climbed yet another incline, navigating loose rock and uneven soil with effortless authority, the engineers could only watch in silent fascination, knowing that they were witnessing a masterclass in mechanical perfection, a vehicle that combined simplicity, strength, reliability, adaptability, and tactical efficiency in a way that was almost unimaginable. And even as their pens and notebooks attempted to capture the details, they knew that no diagram, no series of notes, could ever fully convey the elegance, the efficiency, and the genius they were witnessing. For the Jeep's mastery extended beyond mechanics into intuition, anticipation, and a quiet command over the very terrain it traversed. And as it paused atop the crest of a particularly challenging slope, engine idling, suspension still perfectly balanced, its mud-streaked body gleaming under the moonlight, the engineers finally allowed themselves a collective, unspoken acknowledgement. They had witnessed a creation that transcended ordinary understanding, a masterpiece in every sense, a machine whose presence alone demanded respect, admiration, and a reevaluation of everything they had ever believed about vehicles, warfare, and engineering. And as the night air settled across the compound, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and oil, the Jeep remained a silent sentinel, a living embodiment of endurance, precision, and genius, and the engineers, exhausted yet inspired, could feel the echo of its performance lingering in their minds, a haunting reminder that they had encountered not just a vehicle, but a paradigm, a standard of perfection that would define their understanding, their designs, and their ambitions for years, decades, and perhaps generations to come, a relentless testament to the ingenuity of its creators, and the undeniable truth that some machines are born to endure, dominate, and inspire, and the American Jeep, in all its mud-streaked humming, tire-gripping brilliance, had done all three with a quiet, relentless mastery that left every observer profoundly changed, humbled, and irrevocably in awe. As the night deepened and a gentle mist began to settle over the testing grounds, the Jeep continued its silent dominion, every movement a testament to its extraordinary engineering, gliding over the uneven, mud-choked terrain as though it were predestined to conquer it, and the engineers, still clustered around in a mix of awe, disbelief, and reluctant admiration, could not stop analyzing, recording, and whispering theories to one another, their pens racing across notebooks, diagrams sprawling like wild ivy across pages, attempting to capture every nuance of a machine that seemed to operate on principles far beyond their conventional understanding. And as the Jeep approached a particularly treacherous stretch, a deep, waterlogged trench with jagged rocks jutting from its muddy banks, they collectively held their breath, anticipating at least some struggle, some hesitation, yet the vehicle surged forward with perfect control, tires biting into the mud, suspension flexing in flawless synchronization, engine maintaining a steady, unflappable hum, the weight distribution perfectly balanced to avoid tipping or stalling, the drivetrain sending power to all four wheels in a fluid, seamless motion that defied expectation. And as it climbed from the trench onto higher ground, the engineers exchanged glances, a mixture of awe and disbelief flashing across their faces, recognizing that what they were witnessing was more than engineering. It was artistry, a choreography of metal, rubber, and motion, executed with a precision that seemed almost conscious, as if the vehicle itself understood the challenges before it, anticipating each obstacle and responding with perfect timing. And as the Jeep navigated a series of newly constructed obstacles designed to push every German prototype to its limits, steep embankments, loose gravel paths, mud-choked gullies, and water crossings, it overcame each one with a consistency that was both humbling and terrifying, its every action demonstrating reliability, endurance, and adaptability. The engineers' notebooks now filled with frantic sketches, annotations, and calculations, yet they knew that no amount of documentation could fully capture the elegance and efficiency before them. For the Jeep's genius lay not only in its mechanical components, but in the harmony of the entire system, each part working in unison, anticipating, adapting, and overcoming. And as the hours passed, the vehicle continued its relentless trials, tire tracks weaving a tapestry of performance across the testing grounds, its body streaked with mud and rain, yet undiminished in capability or command, and the engineers, fatigued yet unable to tear their eyes away, began to feel a creeping awareness, a recognition that they were witnessing a creation that would leave an indelible mark on their understanding of mobility, endurance, and mechanical genius. And as the Jeep ascended yet another incline, its tires gripping loose soil with unwavering authority, its suspension absorbing shocks that would have shattered other vehicles, and its engine purring with effortless strength, the engineers could only silently acknowledge the truth. This was a masterpiece, a vehicle whose simplicity belied its extraordinary capability, a creation that harmonized power, durability, adaptability, and reliability in ways they had never thought possible. And as it paused atop the crest, framed against the moonlit sky, the angular silhouette of the Jeep outlined in pale silver light, the hum of its engine fading into the quiet of the night, the engineers finally allowed themselves to fully appreciate the scope of what they had witnessed. understanding that their own designs, theories, and assumptions would never again be the same, and that the American Jeep had not merely passed their tests, it had redefined them, rewriting the rules of engineering, mobility, and battlefield efficiency in ways that would echo through decades, influencing every vehicle, every design, and every engineer who dared to approach its standard. And as the wind whispered through the testing grounds, carrying the faint scent of mud, oil, and rain, the Jeep stood silently, commanding respect not through size or ornamentation, but through flawless execution, relentless endurance, and the quiet authority of a machine that had achieved something rare, remarkable, and eternal. And the engineers, weary, humbled, and profoundly inspired, could only nod in solemn recognition, understanding that they had encountered a creation that transcended ordinary machinery, a vehicle whose legacy would endure, whose brilliance would be studied, admired, and revered, and whose presence, even in silence, communicated lessons in genius, foresight, and the art of engineering mastery that no lecture, textbook, or blueprint could ever hope to replicate. And as the first hints of dawn began to creep across the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows over the mud-streaked testing grounds, the Jeep rested, quietly victorious, a testament to endurance, adaptability, and the ingenuity of its creators, leaving every engineer forever changed, humbled, and in awe of the perfect harmony between simplicity, performance, and timeless brilliance that the American Jeep had so effortlessly demonstrated. A masterpiece whose story would be told, remembered, and revered for generations to come. The first light of dawn began to filter through the morning mist, illuminating the Jeep in a soft, ethereal glow, its mud-splattered frame glistening with the residue of a night-long series of grueling tests. And as the engineers returned to their positions, notebooks at the ready, the sense of anticipation and awe hung thick in the air, for they knew that every moment spent observing this machine would challenge their understanding of endurance, performance, and mechanical genius. And as the Jeep moved forward, it tackled yet another series of obstacles that had been specifically constructed to test the limits of conventional German vehicles. A sequence of mud-laden slopes, narrow ledges, jagged rocks, and water-filled trenches that had incapacitated every other prototype with which they had tested. Yet the Jeep navigated each with a calm, almost deliberate precision, its tires gripping the slippery surfaces with uncanny authority, the suspension flexing with flawless articulation, the engine maintaining a steady, unflappable hum that seemed to communicate confidence, reliability, and an unspoken mastery over the terrain. And as it leapt over fallen logs, crossed trenches, and climbed embankments that would have stopped even the most robust German vehicles, the engineers' pens scratched frantically across pages, diagrams sprawling across notebooks, calculations attempting to quantify what their eyes could scarcely comprehend. Every maneuver a demonstration not just of mechanical superiority, but of design philosophy executed to perfection, where simplicity, strength, and adaptability were fused into a single elegant system. And as the Jeep ascended a particularly steep incline, loose soil giving way beneath the tires, rocks threatening to unseat the wheels, it responded instantaneously. Torque distributed seamlessly across all four wheels, suspension adjusting automatically to maintain balance, the engine delivering precise power without falter, leaving the engineers utterly speechless, recognizing that they were observing a vehicle whose performance defied decades of engineering assumptions, a machine whose mastery of terrain, endurance, and reliability had no equal. And as the vehicle traversed a waterlogged ravine, mud splashing over the fenders, the engineers' fascination deepened, for the Jeep demonstrated a combination of resilience, adaptability, and control that seemed almost intuitive, as though it could read the terrain and adjust in real time to every obstacle. A level of synchronization between mechanics and environment that they had never seen before. And as it emerged unscathed, the engineers exchanged glances, a mixture of awe, admiration, and professional envy evident in their expressions, each recognizing that this was not just a vehicle performing well, it was a masterpiece, a creation that would set a benchmark for decades, its presence forever altering their understanding of engineering, mobility, and the potential of mechanical design. And as the Jeep continued its relentless march across the compound, climbing, sliding, maneuvering, and adapting with flawless precision, the engineers noted every detail, every movement, every adjustment. Yet they knew that no notes, diagrams, or calculations could truly capture the genius of what they were witnessing. For the Jeep's brilliance lay not in complexity, but in the seamless integration of simplicity, reliability, and capability. a design so perfect that it required neither embellishment nor modification to achieve supremacy in every challenge presented. And as the morning turned to afternoon, the Jeep confronted a series of tests that were intended to push its engine, suspension, and drivetrain to absolute limits. Long stretches of mud so deep it would have immobilized tanks, rocky ridges that had shattered prototypes, narrow ledges requiring perfect balance and torque distribution. But with each trial, it responded with calm authority, tires gripping, suspension flexing, engine humming steadily, and the engineers, exhausted yet unable to look away, realized that they were observing not just performance, but endurance, adaptability, and reliability personified in steel and rubber. A vehicle that could absorb shock, anticipate obstacles, and perform flawlessly in situations that would have caused other machines to fail catastrophically. And as the day drew on, the Jeep demonstrated repeated sequences of climbing, fording, navigating, and hauling that underscored its versatility, proving that it was not merely a vehicle of superior mechanics, but a creation that understood, intuitively, the demands of every task, every terrain, every challenge placed before it, a culmination of foresight, engineering brilliance, and battlefield practicality that left the engineers both humbled and inspired. And as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the mud-streaked testing grounds, the Jeep paused atop a final incline, body gleaming under the golden light, engine idling low and steady, tires firmly planted, suspension perfectly balanced, and the engineers, finally able to exhale, acknowledged in unspoken consensus that they had witnessed a machine that transcended ordinary understanding, a creation whose combination of simplicity, durability, adaptability, and flawless execution could only be described as a masterpiece. A vehicle whose lessons would reverberate across generations of engineers, designers, and strategists. A standard so high, so fundamentally perfect, that it would forever challenge and inspire anyone who sought to approach it. And even as the evening shadows lengthened and the first stars appeared, reflecting in the Jeep's mud-slicked body, the presence of the vehicle remained a silent testament to endurance, innovation, and mechanical brilliance, leaving every observer profoundly aware that this unassuming American Jeep had not only passed every test, but had redefined what a vehicle could achieve, dominating terrain, exceeding expectation, and setting a benchmark that would endure for decades. A quiet, relentless masterpiece of engineering, performance, and timeless genius, a creation whose impact would forever echo in the minds, notes, and designs of all who had the privilege to witness it firsthand. The morning sun now fully illuminated the testing grounds, casting long, stark shadows over the mud-choked terrain, and the Jeep, ever steady and unyielding, began a new series of trials designed to push every element of its design to the absolute limit, its angular frame glinting with streaks of mud and rain, tires gripping the uneven surface as if it were fused to the earth, engine humming with low, constant authority, and the engineers, still clustered around with notebooks in hand, pens moving frantically, eyes wide with awe, could scarcely believe that such a small, seemingly simple vehicle could perform with such flawless mastery, each movement demonstrating a harmony between power, control, and reliability that defied conventional understanding. And as the Jeep approached a particularly treacherous stretch of deep mud, interspersed with jagged rocks and fallen logs, it paused for a fraction of a second, seemingly assessing the challenge before it, before surging forward with absolute confidence. Tires gripping, suspension flexing, engine delivering precise power, every component working in perfect synchrony. And as it crossed the mud, splashing water and debris high into the air, the engineers scribbled notes in frantic, almost desperate detail, diagrams sprawling across pages, arrows and annotations attempting to capture the seamless performance before them. Yet knowing that no matter how carefully they documented, they could not fully encapsulate the genius at work. And as the Jeep emerged from the mud, perfectly balanced, undamaged, and fully operational, it was clear that its endurance, reliability, and adaptability were unparalleled, a testament to the meticulous design philosophy that had prioritized simplicity and function over unnecessary complexity. And as it approached a narrow incline, where loose rocks and soil threatened to destabilize any ordinary vehicle, it ascended effortlessly, tires gripping the uneven surface with a confidence that seemed almost sentient, suspension absorbing shocks that would have crippled other vehicles, and the engine humming steadily, its low growl conveying calm authority. And as the engineers leaned closer, noting each flex of the suspension, each rotation of the wheels, each distribution of torque, they could feel the magnitude of what they were witnessing. a vehicle whose performance challenged decades of German engineering, a creation that combined durability, versatility, and tactical superiority in ways that were both subtle and overwhelmingly apparent. And as the Jeep crossed yet another water-filled trench, the engineers murmured to one another, astonished by its ability to maintain balance, traction, and forward momentum despite the uneven, slippery terrain, mud and water clinging to tires and undercarriage. Yet having no effect on performance, and as the day wore on, the Jeep continued its relentless series of tests, climbing embankments, sliding across narrow ledges, navigating rocky inclines, fording rivers, and hauling heavy cargo with perfect stability, each task executed with flawless precision. The engineers' notes growing more desperate, diagrams more complex, as they attempted to comprehend a vehicle that seemed to anticipate obstacles, adapt in real time, and perform consistently under conditions that had humbled every German prototype they had ever tested. And as the afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, the Jeep tackled a series of newly constructed challenges: steep slopes coated with loose gravel, deep mud traps, narrow bridges spanning water-filled ditches, and uneven rocky ledges, each overcome with ease, every component working in perfect harmony. The tires gripping, suspension absorbing, engine delivering constant power, drivetrain distributing torque seamlessly, a symphony of mechanical genius unfolding before their eyes. And as the engineers exchanged glances, they understood fully that they were observing not just a machine performing well, but a vehicle that had redefined every standard of mobility, endurance, reliability, and adaptability they had ever known. A machine whose genius lay in its simplicity, its thoughtful design, and its flawless execution. And as the Jeep paused atop a high ridge, body streaked with mud, engine idling low, suspension perfectly balanced, the engineers allowed themselves a rare moment of awe-filled silence, realizing that this was a creation that would forever alter their understanding of mechanical engineering, mobility, and battlefield efficiency, a standard so high, so fundamentally perfect, that it would remain unmatched for decades. And as the sun set behind distant hills, casting the Jeep's silhouette in dramatic relief, they recognized collectively that they had witnessed a masterpiece, a vehicle whose lessons in endurance, adaptability, tactical supremacy, and simple genius would echo through generations of designers, engineers, and strategists, a creation that had not merely survived every test, but had dominated them, leaving an indelible mark on everyone fortunate enough to observe its relentless, flawless performance. And as the first stars appeared in the night sky, reflecting faintly in the mud-slicked body of the Jeep, it stood silently, commanding respect, admiration, and a deep, unshakable awareness of its superiority, a vehicle whose influence would endure far beyond the confines of the testing grounds, a true masterpiece of engineering, performance, and timeless brilliance, leaving all who witnessed it profoundly humbled, inspired, and forever changed by its quiet, relentless mastery over terrain, circumstance, and expectation.